Hey everybody, it's Book of Katherine, and we're going to do something pretty exciting today to me. We're going to cover my last year of research. I'm going to catch you guys up and hopefully do it in a nice, just short little time, but I'm making sure I'm covering all the bases. So if you've been following me for a while, we're going to be doing what chapter we are on in Revelations. In fact, like what verse are we on? There's an actual verse that we're kind of lingering on or around. So, we're going to do that today. We're going to cover where we are in Revelations. But as some of you who have been with me for a while now, you know that, well, last April, I was saying, here are the Revelations events of the last 200 years. And what did I say they were? Well, I was saying Prince Albert is the Antichrist. I was going through how he started Nazism and he laid the basis for communism. And those were really evil things, right? And if you go through it, like I said, Seal 1, this is Prince Albert. And I did it to very, very close detail. Like it's very, very detailed. These were serious, serious things that I couldn't believe how exact the seals lined up with things that happened with Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. It was an absolute shock to me. Look, like proof, Wikipedia states that the Spanish influenza affected 1/4 of the world's population, and Revelation 6:8 says 1/4 of the world's population will be affected. So I couldn't believe these things were matching up so clearly. Seal 6, the atom bomb, 1945 Hiroshima, it said that the sky would be curled back and folded back, almost described the atom bomb to a T. So it was just so easy. Like, I couldn't believe it. It took a lot of work back then in April. It took so much work, months of work. But in the end, I said compiled so far. And I had been very clear in these, that this was the research we had so far. And then you guys really didn't hear a lot, probably because of COVID. And suddenly here we are a year later, and I'm saying, OMG, tell me our current events are not literally in chapters 20 and 21 of Revelations, which equals 2021. OMG. So what am I? Because that, by the way, these chapters, for you, those of you who don't know, like those chapters are way, way past the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets and the 7 cups. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens after that. The destruction of Babylon. The 2 beasts are thrown into the lake of fire, including the false prophet. But something that we didn't notice is that, Muhammad was a false prophet. According to the Bible and Christianity and everything, he called himself a prophet, and instead he taught 7 ways to lie, which Jesus said, the truth will set you free. I am the truth. So it's very, very interesting how we don't notice things like that happened back then. And I'm going to tell you why I got off of this idea, what distracted me from the idea that Prince Albert was the Antichrist, and that maybe we were dating things a little bit late in the game. And there were a couple of things that went into that. So first of all, the first thing, and also, by the way, don't forget, I've also been doing these videos talking about, hey, Beirut is Babylon. It said right after all the plagues, it said, then Babylon would fall. It said Babylon would fall, and I found out that Beirut was this 5,000-year-old city, older than Jerusalem, older than Athens, older than most cities on the planet, and it was exploded right there in August. Well, what I didn't know was that here was the Fertile Crescent. It went both ways, and in 2020, they don't ever put Beirut on any of these maps, even if it's older than all of these cities. It's a major port city. But it turns out all the way before the actual city of Babylon was destroyed in 636 AD by Islam. And we don't really notice any of that, of the stuff that happened way, way back in the past. And so I want to go over how I found out that, we're kind of chapters ahead, and all of this sealed scroll, all of these things of the trumpets, and all of these cups happened beforehand. And I know you're going to ask me, well, then how could it fit so close to, how could you confuse it with Prince Albert and Queen Victoria. And actually, I found out why that is. Right there in chapter 20, when it says he'll be released from, because there's 1,000 years. I should make that clear. Before the end, there's like, when they say this, all this happens, and then there's supposed to be 1,000 years of reigning with Christ before the actual end comes of 20 and 21 of Revelations. There's 1,000 years in between. So it's very, very important. I'm not just saying, oh, we went to a new chapter. I'm saying that 1,000 years of reigning with Christ is over. It's behind us. And I'm going to tell you why that is today. So first of all, the reason why I found this was because in reality, even though I went and did something different than he said, Chuck Missler is the only pastor I've really shared on our feed because he's not really a pastor, right? He does these speeches just for people online and for a few people. But for the most part, he's much more independent. And not only that, he made things very easy to read. So, for example, this is one of the graphics that he did. Very easy to understand, right? Very easy to be like, oh, there they all are. And he would point out how there's so much symmetry in Revelations. And so he really helped a lot of us out in our research, and a lot of my followers really got into him. And I don't blame them, even though I totally disagree with his assessment. Though I saw later on in 2017, he started turning around to this actual assessment. I found that out today. So, what happened is that Chuck Missler actually pointed out, he said, let's see, where is it? I have so many different verses. Here it is. It's hiding behind my screen. I'm going to have to do that a little while, every once in a while. So this is what Chuck Missler pointed out to me. I didn't get through the whole entire sermon that he did on this, or if you want to call it what he did a sermon. But what he said was, he said, notice in the very first chapter of Revelations, right? If we're in the very first chapter of Revelations, he says, God gave it, right, a revealing of Jesus the Messiah. God gave it to make plain to his servants what is about to happen. That doesn't sound like 2,000 years later. Be aware of what's about to happen. Then he also says, the time is just about up. Saying, hey, guess what? Like, this is about to happen. It's a sense of urgency. It opens with a sense of urgency. But the second thing Chuck Missler pointed out, well, he didn't point out these two. Chuck Missler didn't point out that, hey, this is about to happen. This book is about to happen and get started. And time's about up. Time is of the urgency. Be ready, be prepared. What he focused on instead is the green. How blessed the reader, how blessed are hearers and keepers of these oracle words, all the words written in this book. And what he said was, he said not one single book in the Bible, not any prophet, anywhere did it say the reader would be blessed if they read this book. He's like, that is a new feature. And in his translation, it was like, read the entire book. And I was like, I don't know anyone who's read the entire book of Revelations. I haven't read that. And that was daunting to me with my F&D. I was like, I got to read the whole thing, like the whole thing. But I thought that was very interesting that this book of Revelation started with an admonition of like, read the whole thing and you'll be blessed. Read the whole thing. And so two things happened. So I always kept that in the back of my mind. Wow, I really haven't read the whole thing. I'm kind of just reading about Babylon, or I'm just reading about the seals, or I'm just reading here. And the thing that struck me about that is, hold on a minute. Ooh, no, I don't know how to pause this thing. I'm like, normally my other videos, I pause and I get my brain back together. But, oh, no, I can't do that on this one. I don't know how to do that. So anyway, so I just that was right. So what I had said was, when I left off with these, right, when I was doing this kind of series, and I was talking about this in last April, as I went on with that, I was able to trace it all the way back to doing these videos, to do my Insider Babylon videos. I mean, I got all the way into chapter 15 and 16 of Revelations, and I was like, we are right on track. We are right on track. We are right on track. Everything's matching. Everything's right. Right down to Beirut exploding. I was like, wow, look at how close this matches. The problem is that then, ooh, don't go there. The problem was that after that, when we got further on, oh, I was going to put it here. When we got further on into it, like Revelation 16, it said this thing about, I heard a shout from the command. Basically, the first angel stepped up and poured his bowl out on earth. Loathsome, stinking sores erupted out on all who had taken the mark of the beast and worshipped his image. And man, I tried as hard as I could to find loathsome, stinking sores. Like, I am telling you, these things I could not find on all who take the mark of the beast and worshipped his image. And I was like, I have not found I have found the plague. For example, COVID was lung, right? Lung related, flu related. Found out the plague came back, but it wasn't the kind that had loathsome stinking boils. Instead, that was also the flu. Then it was the avian flu. Everything was affecting the lungs. All the plagues going on today are affecting the lungs. And there's a lot of different plagues happening, but they all affect the lungs. And none of them were loathsome, stinking sores. I found about some that are with diabetes, but the entire world isn't really struggling with diabetes. Only a few are. And I was like, I think we might have a bit of a problem. So that was number one, is that I couldn't find this. And not only that, but this happened out of order. I couldn't find these loathsome, stinking sores anywhere today. You know where I could find them, though? I could find them back with Emperor Justinian. I traced back when I was like, well, if the plague isn't doing these big pustules now, like, when did they start? And I found out that they started all the way back with Emperor Justinian, like, long time ago. Where is he? Emperor Justinian. Emperor Justinian. Where are you? Did I lose you? Oh, is that you there? Hello. There you are. Hi. Hi, Emperor Justinian. The plague of Justinian. This is the thing. No one calls it the bubonic plague. Do you know how you have to find out? This was so freaking hard to find. If you read down from Wikipedia and everything, look at the little small print and it says bubonic plague. And I'm like, that's the Black Plague. But because it started in 541 AD, no one really notices it. The other thing is that a guy on a white horse, that's the first horse, Attila the Hun was known for driving a white horse and having a bow and arrow. And he massacred from one side of the old world continent, from east of Asia, all the way to Europe. I mean, some kings and queens are still related to Attila the Hun. A lot of people say the Saxe-Coburg, that clan is related to Attila the Hun, because they kind of do business the same way that he did blood. So Attila the Hun, and that's it. That's the defining thing, is that there's a white horse and there's a bow, a conqueror coming to conquer, right? And of course, I thought, hey, that guy with the white horse, that's got to be Prince Albert. It's got to be, because Prince Albert played the song Conquering Hero to Conquer as he's walking into his wedding with Queen Victoria, and then they conquered the world and created this massive British Empire and created a thing called the Third World Country. They just sucked all the life out of a country until they were emaciated. Sometimes I think the Dark Crystal is based upon what those two did. So it's very easy to think that that was the Antichrist, that was him. But instead, I learned that, Attila the Hun actually went out there and did things on a white horse with a bow, and physically did it way back in 450 AD. Huh. Well, 450 AD is before 541 AD. That would make the horse coming 100 years before the plague, which is exactly the rate that's exactly how it goes in order. When you look at the order of things, so the conquering guy that came to conquer was number 1, white horse and a bow, crossbow. The plagues came over here. That was here in the cups, and some say they overlap. I don't know. I haven't studied it that closely. But my point in all this is to say, I think that the reason I was like, well, how can they both be true? How can both be true? And that's when I found out that it said in Revelations 20, it says, when the 1,000 years are up, Satan will be let loose from his cell, and this is the biggest thing of all, and will launch again his old work of deceiving the nations. And will launch again his old work of deceiving the nations. And I was like, he just repeated everything. And it told us he would repeat it for a short time, like 1840 to now. Satan was let loose to do his old tricks again. It was like he did his best the first time, and he just was like, play it again, Sam, and he did it all again. And that's why when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, the old word. And you don't see it because look at how much they do in just this little short. We'll get to chapter 20, but when you see chapter 20, is this chapter 20? Let's look up. I always do the Message translation. When you get to chapter 20, do you know how much it packs in here? This is the 1,000 years that there's supposed to be a break from Satan. And I saw an angel descending out of heaven. He carried the key to the abyss in a chain, a huge chain. He grabbed up the dragon, the very devil, Satan himself, chained him up for 1,000 years, and dumped him into the abyss, slammed it shut, sealed tight. No more trouble out of him, deceiving the nations, which I think is interesting. Deceiving the nations until the 1,000 years are up. After that, he has to be let out briefly. Then all of a sudden, I saw thrones. And I'm like, oh, I'll go through that. Those put in charge of judgment sat on the thrones. I also saw the souls of those beheaded. And then, like, just a little bit, it goes into when the 1,000 years are up, Satan will be let loose from his cell and watch. Didn't I just read that? I could have sworn. Uh-oh. We'll get to that later. But my point is that they really, really go through things very, very quickly. Whereas one event would take up a whole chapter. Like, for example, I saw a great white throne, one enthroned, nothing could stand before. Normally that would be a whole chapter in Revelations. And this time, it's not. They do like 12 chapters in one itty-bitty chapter, 1,000 years. And what that tells me is, by doing so much, what happens is people who don't read the whole thing can easily think that there isn't much to Revelations once you get past all these cups. If you don't read the whole book, then what happens is this. You get exactly this, and this is also what tripped me up, is that you get a church teaching this. Look at all these things. Ephesus, Smyrna, the tribulation, one world government, all here. Then you have another person saying, oh, here's a sign, church age right over here. And then new heaven and a new earth over here, Satan loosed, right? Then over here, different thing. Timeline of the end times, present church age, millennial reign of Christ, and that's what really got to me finally, is that they had all these timelines where this church age was totally separated from this millennial reign of Christ, this 1,000 years. And I was like, these are the same things. Like, these are literally the millennial reign of Christ here. This guy, 1,000 years, is actually this. If you ask anyone, I've emailed some pastors and asked them, how long do you think the church age lasted? How long? They're like, oh, I couldn't tell you exact years. And I'm like, just baseball it. And do you know what they all tell me? Every single one says, church age, 1,000 years. And I'm like, so why isn't that the millennial reign of Christ? You know, if they're allowing a dialogue, I get to say this. And then they're like, okay, I need a minute. But that's the big thing, is that it was a big thing for me to really be like, figure out that I can't trust these charts that everyone's throwing at me, that everyone's saying the church age and this Christ resurrection and this church age and all the raptures and tribulations and second coming, the kingdom, and basically saying what all of them were telling me was that this was happening today and I needed to look for the Antichrist today. And you know what I did? I started to look for the Antichrist today. And did you know what? I was like, let's start here. Because I didn't, like I said, Chuck Bliss was the only guy we listened to, and it was only for like a month. But what I would do is I'd always read the text, right? So I was like, I'm going to I need to find out where all the passages about the Antichrist are. And no one had it. Not one site has every single passage about the Antichrist. And that, my friends, is because Peter and Paul actually disagreed. These two people that these churches absolutely worship and, glorify, not even glorify, they worship, they say they're deities. A lot of the Orthodox churches and these churches of pomp and circumstance really teach. Jesus taught against churches. He did not want anyone going and meeting in a certain place, never mind telling anyone. And Peter even said it. Peter, right here on the left, he actually said, just live your life in adoration of Jesus. Just follow your master. And if someone asks you why you live differently, then tell them, and tell them with respect. That ain't anything that Paul did, right? Paul was very, very different. Paul was like, go and preach the message. He added a whole new religion. He made like I've said in the past, totally goes against Christianity. And in terms of the Antichrist, you find these two actually arguing. Paul's like, why are you listening to this person again? I told you this, and just blows up all these things. And eventually, due to other studies and stuff, I deleted Paul. Like, I just was like, you're out. Because he's not an apostle. He's not one of the 12. He'd say he's one of the 12. He's not one of the 12. And when you knock out Paul, suddenly these crazy things that are all over the place, not one church has the same thing. But again, here's the church age separated from a millennium. Once you delete Paul out of it, it's suddenly very, very clear to see. It's very, very clear that, okay, this church age, like this one had, this church age that they had, like this Apostle Paul, let me tell you, you would not believe, even when the BBC, if any media outlet covers Christianity at all they talk about is Paul, because Paul institutes a whole new set of religious standards. Women cover up her hair. Jesus said, no, let her go ahead and wash my feet with her hair. I mean, Jesus taught one way to live, and Paul taught a different way to live, and churches today love teaching what Paul did because it's very legalistic, just like Buddhism is, just by Hinduism is. What Jesus teaches is for people to be independent, listening to him, and just doing what he says. And that doesn't make anybody any money, quite frankly. And so they love to teach Paul instead. It really puts people into a servant position. And then it puts people having these crazy different timelines that make no sense because of what Paul said the Antichrist would be. And the Antichrist, his Antichrist, doesn't line up with anything that had happened yet. So people are like, well, all the stuff that Daniel said, all this stuff is still happening. When the Antichrist comes, this stuff will happen. And so that really, really got us distracted. It really worked. I mean, I was really trying to figure out where these fell. They were saying this was still coming. And I thought it was radical for me to say, actually, I think the Antichrist is about 200 years old. I think he came back in 1840, actually. And I had such a detailed list. That itself was so radical. And then I started finding the sites that said, yeah, actually, we believe what it says. We think this is actually correct, that this is about to happen, and the time is just about up. They're like, we actually believe that, and we think there's a ton of evidence that the entire book, first part of Revelations, they said, we think we have a ton of proof that all of this stuff actually happened a long, long time ago. And so I started looking into it. I was like, let me just start seeing what lines up. And when I started slowly going through it, boy, let me tell you, like, if you really think about it, not only is there the Black Plague breaks out in 1541, right? It's not just that. It's not just that we have Attila the Hun with the actual bow and arrow and the white horse, but it's also, I mean, the plague was really bad. This plague, by the way, it wiped out 1/4 of the population, killed 25 million people at the smallest number. Just, that's why they call it the epic of epidemics. This thing changed the way society was, killed off the Byzantine Empire. Massive, just killed it off. So that was a massive plague on the scales that they talked about, right? Then there was learning about Islam, right? Islam came through. Islam happened 622 to 75. That was something no one had seen, never see again. I mean, and we don't think about that today. Everyone says, oh, the worst of the worst is going to happen to us, the Great Tribulation. Really? Is something worse than Islam coming through and cutting off the heads of everyone? Really? Is that really the worst? Are you kidding me? We were not persecuted before? Are you really going to say that didn't happen? Islam killed 270 million people in the last 1,400 years. Massive, massive. And they want to do it again. This is how far Islam went. Massive. That's the Great Tribulation. Getting your head cut off for your faith. When it came back, when the Caliphate came back in World War I, in those days. Now, this is going to be graphic, so I'm not kidding. There's nudity in it. It's just a single picture, but if you have young children or whatever, this isn't for them to see at this point. And young kids, I know you're going to just watch it anyway, but just trust me for once and just, kind of avoid it. I saw stuff like this when I was a kid, and it gave me nightmares. I don't want to give you nightmares. Yeah? So you can just listen to me, but not watch it. So, but when the Caliphate came back in the early 1900s, this is what they did to Christians. Christian women, after raping them, put them up on crosses because they wouldn't convert. And Islam is convert or die. And by the way, the group that did this, this is the Armenian genocide. And the group that committed the Armenian genocide, their name is actually the Young Turks. And that's what the current Young Turks show is made off on YouTube. Just keep that in mind when you're like, well, why did they get funded by the Middle East? I'll tell you why they got funded by the Middle East. Because it is a show that's pro-Middle Eastern, pro-Sharia, right? So they hired an Armenian girl just to make it look like they weren't. But that's what's so sick and twisted about the show. It's something only Satan would do, is actually do a show named after the people who did this. Wiped out Armenia. And let me just make this a little bit more personal to you. Like, Kim Kardashian is Armenian. Kylie Jenner is Armenian. These people that back then in the early 1900s, they would have been doing this to them. And I don't care if you don't like them. I'm saying they're humans. These were real people, real talent. They're humans. Incredible. And Islam was like, you're out. It's horrific that they're still doing crucifixions. That is called a tribulation. But if you think about it, the plague still continues on today, and so does Islam still continues on today. My point is that these things were visited upon the earth before 888. I think that all of these things were carried out before 888. These 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls. The 7 bowls had the plague in it, right? And we also know that a lot of the things, all the pictures of the sea animals that used to be, we see all these animals all over all this artwork, and none of those animals exist today. It's like, they said in the 7 bowls, it says all the creatures on the earth died. And I'm like, well, maybe that explains why we never see the animals that are in these portraits and paintings from history. They have detailed paintings, and we don't see them anymore. They're not around. And I'm like, is that why? Because they killed off everything? So anyway, and I mean, look at the Middle East. It's a big freaking desert, right? It used to be lush. You see the bones and skeletons of whales in North Africa. Incredible life, and it was turned into dust. So, and that goes to my point that when we have something like Babylon, yeah, I think in 636 AD, which is after, by the way, that was the thing it ended with. In the Bible, in Revelations, it ends with the destruction of Babylon, right? It has the White Rider first, and that would be Attila the Hun. And then it has the bubonic plague next, 541. So this one, Attila the Hun, was 550 AD, right? Then we go into the bubonic plague, 541. So 450, 551. And then the very last thing that happens is 636 AD. Babylon is destroyed. A lot of nations took it over, but kept it to be a mecca of all this learning and science. Not when this happened. Not when this happened, honey. Oh, no, no. They went through and they immediately, it was Islam that went through. It was Islam that conquered it. And immediately they took all of the engineers and they started re-engineering the city. And that's why it's just a dust heap today, and why Saddam Hussein had to build it up and do all these new projects. There was nothing left of Babylon. But that's what Islam does. They create a whole new society, what's called the Islamic State. Where Islam goes, they create an actual government. And so there's no, right there, the Babylon was right here. It's not there anymore. And so I think that when it says Satan was up to his old tricks, he was let loose from his cell and will launch again his old work of deceiving nations. I was like, yeah, Babylon just happened again. And God actually uses it because he gives Satan permission of what to do. He did it with the bombing of Beirut. And that actually completed the whole trade route. And you know why he attacks this trade route thing? I mean, I'm just saying that's why the Bible lined up so closely with my series, with my Insider Babylon series. I was like, it lines up so closely with all the prophecies about what's going to happen to Babylon. And it just, so we learned so much. But then when it said, is it going to sink? And this thing never sunk. The corn thing never sunk. That was another sign to me that maybe something's different. Maybe something's wrong. And I'm like, oh, we're just repeating now. We're just repeating now. This is on repeat. This is Satan up to his old tricks. And he has to get permission from the Lord to do anything that he does. Because the Lord God is Lord Almighty. Satan is powerful, but he's not more powerful than God. He has to get permission from God in order to do anything. And so he was allowed to do something and destroy another city. But when he got to destroy another city, it had to be Babylon. And that's why I say evil will always go and eat its own. Always. And always, if you are a servant, if you give up your heart to him or your life to him or your soul to him in some kind of ceremony, I saw it all the time in Hollywood, that person's never the same again because the demon's inside of them eating their body away. And you just see them start to sink. And if they ever get their demon killed, which I've also seen, forget the extra, as if the Catholic priests who practice paganism know how to exorcise anyone. Give me a freaking break. But when they do that, they start to, you see them, they're so weak as a shell after that. If you've had that, it's a horrible experience. I don't wish it on anyone watching anybody being infected by a demon or watching them after. It's really, really rough. Our bodies have our own souls. We're so amazingly made that it doesn't make it really kills us when we take on a demon from another world, a Nephilim's nephew, the whole nine yards. So anyway, I wanted to point something out, by the way, that I thought was very interesting. When this big battle happened in 636, right? The Battle of Babylon in 633, Muslim conquest, right? When it happened, and you can watch some videos about how it happened, it actually happened on the 15th to 20th of August in 636. Isn't that crazy? Because this happened on August 4th. And I'm wondering if we looked it up, would the moons be the exact same, since that's the way the Father actually does his calendar throughout the prophets? He does a lunar calendar. I'm wondering if, and a solar calendar together. I'm wondering if this August 4th destruction of Babylon, that's why I said right here in this thing, I said this happened 636 AD, this happened in 2020 AD, but amazingly, they both happened in August. This one in August 15th to 20th, and this one in August 4th. And isn't that interesting that both these huge cities of Babylon were destroyed so quickly? I think that's the point. How fast for that day and age was Babylon destroyed? And then how fast for this day and age was Beirut destroyed? The two linking chains of trade. And if you know anything about history, we've been learning so much about the Bible. Nothing that the pastors teach I'm learning. I'm hearing all the time that the pastors don't know any of this. It turns out Satan didn't fall because he was jealous of man. He fell because he was in love with buying and selling. And this is all about buying and selling. Satan had all these gems all over himself. He used to be a high angel that guarded the Garden of Eden, and he used to have this huge breastplate on and all these gems and gold on it, and it doesn't really look too good for Israel when the priests had big gold, breastplates with big gems on it. That I don't believe any of that was written in the prophets and instructing them to do that. So anyway, all of this is to go ahead and say that I think that Satan was wrapped up for 1,000 years already. I think that's in the past. I think that when he was wrapped up, that's why we went from, horrible Islam cutting off our heads to, and Attila the Hun killing and raping people from one side of the continents to the other side of the continents. We switch from that, and all of a sudden, out of all of that, it doesn't get worse. It suddenly gets better. Out of nowhere, the Renaissance happens. All of a sudden, look at this. This is the pillar. This, on the top left, is the type of pillar that Israel had in the Solomon's Temple. But it didn't change. It was this pillar. And in the Renaissance era, it actually got this detailed. And why is that? Because people started talking to each other of all classes. The class system went from here to here. And why did that happen? Because it actually says in Revelations that because they went through the tribulation, actually says this in Revelations, because you went through this tribulation period of having your heads cut off for your faith. Because I found out that Israel, the Jews actually got a great deal. They signed at the very beginning of this, 636, I think it was like 640 or 650, they signed a pact so that they could pass through these lands unharmed. The Christians are the only ones that never got a pact. They're the only ones that kept being killed for 270 million, or for 1,400 years. And that's the same for today, right? You see, when you see persecution by Islam and you see people hanging up and having their wrists nailed through, it's a Christian, right? That's kind of common knowledge in the human rights industries. So it says, because you dealt with all this persecution and because you dealt with all this tribulation, you will be given 10 kings. It says you will be given thrones. You will get to reign with Christ. It says because of that, you will get to reign with Christ. And it says right in Revelations 20, let's go back to Revelations 20. Let's really break this down and see how it's all there. And this is what really confirmed it for me, is reading this of what happens. So after the 1,000 years are up, what happens? No one talks about this. They really don't. Try and find a pastor who talks about after the 1,000 years. They all think the seals aren't even happening yet. The Antichrist still hasn't come yet. They haven't read the whole book of Revelations. So what we find out is that it says, I saw thrones. When Satan goes back to when it says that after he's tied up and he can't deceive the nation anymore, he says he saw thrones. Well, guess what? The Roman Empire changed drastically after all this kind of horrible stuff went on. If you look up the kings and rulers of Europe, if you actually look this up, the timeline, and art history is great. They help so much, they preserve so much that we actually have really good timelines. Their timelines actually say Central Europe 962. All these elected kings 1572. Actually, I know that's not true. Poland goes all the way back to the 1100s. They're the first king in the 1100s. I can't remember their name, but they actually slayed a dragon. But I know why that is. That the elites hate Poland. They hate the Polish, just like the Germans hated the Polish. So I'm not surprised. You know what I mean? They are like, you can't join, like 962. But here's an interesting thing. 962. 962. So what happens? When does Satan get tied up? Because it says, I saw thrones. We know that thrones happen around 962 and 1100. And then he also says, those put in charge of judgment sat on thrones. I also saw the souls of those beheaded because of their witness to Jesus Christ and the Word of God, who refused to worship either the beast or his image, refused to take his mark on their forehead or hand. They lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The church age. The church age. That's this church age they all keep pointing out. The church age. Because they dealt with Islam, because they dealt with beheadings, because Diocletian did horrific things to the Christians. Diocletian passed hundreds of laws to read out, and just, he'd have them brought before them. His own staff would become a Christian. He'd hear about it. He'd put him in front. He'd be like, worship this God. Worship him now. And they wouldn't, and they'd just go wham and lob off his head right there in the middle of court. But here they have this they'll have the church age. Oh, this is the new one by Missler. That's better. But here they have the church age. This is all Christ going ahead and being together. All right, so that's the millennium. Because they're witness, they get to rule from Europe, and they get to enjoy the benefits of that. Then it says the rest of the dead did not live until the 1,000 years were up. This is first. When the 1,000 years. Okay, so we know that when it talks about their great persecution, we know that Attila the Hun, and we know that Islam fall underneath that. So in my opinion, of all the calculations that I've done, and all the research that I've done, I've calculated that the Holy Roman Empire is one of the beasts, for sure. I think Italy or Great Britain is one of the beasts. And the reason I say that is that, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, the ones that had this huge tree, from these two came this huge, look at all these kings and queens, right? Like, you look at a little thing, it's like Prince Harold of Schleswig-Holstein. All these guys are princes and princesses. And let me tell you, like this guy, I believe that guy was king during the World War I, and it was one of his relatives that he was warring against. So they changed their name to Windsor, but it's still all this German tree. From two Germans of Saxe-Coburg and Cothaline came a ton of princes. And where do they rule? All over. Almost every throne in Europe today is run by a German king or queen. Nearly every single one. And there's a lot. There's way more than you'd think. And you can find that they're with the SDGs, the global goals, the international socialism scheme, which these two thought up, right? But my point is that these are Germans. So the crown and the throne of England, right around 1000 AD, a guy married, one of the kings of England married his daughter to Prussia. And that's it. Like, he did that on purpose. He wanted to join this. The king, he had the northern, he had England here, and then he had Denmark. He had these huge lands right around north of France, England. He had Denmark. And what he did for security is he went ahead and married his daughter off to this huge thing of Germany. People don't realize how big Germany actually was. Parts of Italy were German. All of these. And what happened is right around 888, it stops expanding, it stops eating up people, it stops doing all these things. You have to remember, Germany is the one that Rome couldn't defeat. The Roman Empire had a very hard time beating the Germanic tribes, the Ashkenazi, right? So anyway, in 888 to 1888, if you ever studied Germany in the 1800s, you know all the stuff that happened in 1888. Like, that's when BASF took off, Bayer took off. They dug up all the relics of the demons They dug up in 1808 is when they dug up the seat of Satan in Pergamum and brought Pergamum to Berlin. They dug up the gods of Egypt and imported them to Berlin. They dug up Ishtar's gate and they brought it to Berlin. And that's when they start doing rallying up. The year of 1888 is the year of 3 emperors. And that's kind of God's way of letting us know there's the number 3. I have ordained this, right? So I have said that this shall happen. And what they do is so that's when you can kind of, all of a sudden after they do that, they start doing a massive expansionist in 1888 after the 3 emperors. They have this massive expansionist agenda. And remember, it's the first grandson of Queen Victoria that ran them into all of this, that ran them into the world. They did Krupp steel. They started making all the chemical gases that, what did they do? They dropped them from planes in World War I. And the most people that ever died was in World War I. I don't care what they say about COVID. They took cans of poison gas, of rat killer, of weed killer, all these new things that they'd created, and they made those bombs, and they just went over any place they wanted to wipe out. And they just took out train stations. They just took out fields of farm workers. Yeah, this is how big the family is. This is how many kingdoms are under the Holy Roman Empire of Germany. And look, what do they celebrate? The act of crucifixion. And so that's why I think that they are actually related. The Holy Roman Empire, a beast, is also related to Muhammad, who followers still crucified today. Anyway, I'm getting all over the place. So anyway, my point is to say that in all, I think that the Holy Roman Empire was the beast where Satan actually came out. Today, it's where the climate change, international socialism agenda is run out of, is Germany. But Germany has people that they've put on the Pope throne. As you saw, if you look into it, Pope Francis today comes from here, right near Parma, north of Florence. He actually comes from the German Empire, as did Pope Benedict before, who was actually a Nazi youth. So much of Rome is actually controlled by Germans. If you look into Sephardic Jews or even the DNA of Italians, it turns out the overcross with Germany is insane. And so this whole Holy Roman Empire, I think, is the beast. They may be one beast, and then they worked with the false prophet. But the point is that I'm saying that I think this was tied up, and we saw them tied up between the year of 888 to 1888. I thought that a long time ago, and I've only seen more and more evidence to support it. And because of that, we went from a land of people who were using the sword. Hello, try to work. Using the sword to get their point across to, and this, remember, we're all the way up here. They were definitely into Europe. And then all of a sudden, things start to change in Europe. And suddenly we have these things, this Renaissance happening where you have these incredible buildings. I mean, did I actually get a copy of any of those to you? I know I downloaded them. So I'm like, where are they? Where are these beautiful buildings? Look it up. If you look up the buildings of the Renaissance, they are just stunning. I know I downloaded them, but they are absolutely, it goes from just these basic flat top houses to all, like, you get to see this in action. You get to actually see some of this in action. Let me see if I can find it. I'd love to show you what it actually looked like. Because it's just so beautiful, these buildings. Did they not actually come down? Because gosh darn, they were beautiful. I guess it didn't download, or at least it's not showing up here. So, all right. I wish I could show you some of these buildings, but I mean, just think about the Vatican. I'll put it that way. If you look at the Vatican, if you think about how the Vatican was built in the Renaissance era, right? The Vatican was built then, and it's this huge, glorious, monstrous thing. But look at the inside of St. Peter's Chapel, like St. Peter's Basilica. Look inside that thing. That's the Renaissance era. We went from murdering Attila the Hun days to all of a sudden these beautiful days of beauty. That doesn't happen. Satan would never allow that to happen. Now, people would say, well, the plague kept on going. and bad things still happened in the middle of this church age, that's not really reigning with Christ. And my answer to that is he didn't say he was taking away sin in that millennium. There was no promise of taking away sin. If you read it, it just says that he will launch again its old work of deceiving nations. When they lock it up, it just says here, when they say that chained him up for 1,000 years, dumped him in the abyss, slammed it shut, sealed tight, no more trouble out of him, deceiving the nations. Well, that's all it says. But the nations have had lies told to them. He has been deceiving them for about 5,000 years, 5,500 years. And then, so there's lies are still out there. And then, there's still the fact that we have sin in us. We are greedy. We love money. That wasn't going to go away. But there was a rate. People did fear God, and they did fear Christ, and they did say that he was the one. And also what happened in this Renaissance time is, as you can see here, if you look at this, what they're doing here, this is the Gutenberg Bible in the 1440s. It just took 600 years. Suddenly they're doing the Bible. And I think that's how America came about, is because Satan was tied up. I don't think there's a chance in hell. Right now, Satan's out, right? Do you think a country like America could ever happen today? No way. They would say they're being colonialists. All these lies about America and its founding are going out today. They don't attack the Spanish people. They don't attack the Pope, who said, we're going to enslave all of you and enslave people on the California coast, on the West Coast, where all those states are having trouble right now because they were founded by slavery. On the other side, we have the East Coast, where I am, and I've learned a lot about that. And they got their land from trading. And the Native Americans did not have weapons. They did not have the medicines that were available. And they actually traded. They weren't just going to take land from anybody because they had already had their land taken. They knew exactly what it was like. And of course, there were some settlers that were great, and then there were some settlers. England got in on it real quick and ruined Boston almost immediately. And Rhode Island is where free expression and freedom of religion was first truly practiced and took root. And that is why there are so many earthquakes, I think, happening right at Providence, Rhode Island, because they've gone back on it as well. We have truly fallen as a nation. And I think that had to happen, in order for the end to come. So anyway, that's how I think I've gone through everything. That's how I got from this tweet a year ago saying, here are the events. I think the Antichrist is, I think it's Prince Albert. I'm not saying any of this isn't real. All of this happened. But I'm saying he is a mirror reflection. Satan came out and was like, holy crap, look at how far they've come. They've made this thing called a Bill of Rights. All I had was 1,000 years gone and everything's gone to crap. This much? What is this? Freedom of, and what is this? People living all over the world in harmony, nations living together? What the heck? It immediately goes to town, tearing them all apart, right? With his old tricks, doing the exact same thing and totally twisting this idea of thrones and not having good kings, but having horrible kings that are dictators and live just like the Egyptians. That's exactly what Queen Victoria did. She went right back to the ways of the Egyptians and having slaves. And so I think that happened. Yes, it's a mirror, but I think there are 1,000 years where beautiful things happened, beautiful freedoms happened. Look at this. People talking to one another. The key of Satan being locked up. The people of the day definitely thought that that's what was happening. They definitely thought that. Look at the buildings here. This became normal. This was not normal. They didn't do that in Babylon. They didn't do things. That's totally, these are beautiful buildings. Very hard to do. But they did it because people were more equal, right? That became an inequality thing. This thing of the Egyptians or Babylonians far above their people. Things started to even out because of following Christ and because they started to do things like the Gutenberg Bible. Before, it was like only the people above got to read. The libraries of Alexandria were just for the elites, just for those families. And yet the Gutenberg Bible, when Satan is locked up, things like the printing press begin, and they begin sharing the Bible, and that eventually led to the Reformation and the loss. That's the thing, is that the Pope lost all of his power with the Reformation. So I think people say, oh, the Pope is the Antichrist. I said Pope is like one of the beasts or whatever. But he lost all of his power with America. He lost all of his power with the Reformation in that Renaissance era. And that's why I think that all happened before the beast, I think, got thrown in. I think the false prophet Muhammad got thrown in. And I think when Satan came back in 1888, he was like, let's rev it all up again. And you can look at it. The caliphate, when it began again, when the caliphate sparked up, that was right after 1888. Right after they dug up everything that was in here, and everything that was in here, and everything that was in here, and they moved it up here to Berlin. And they still have it. They have the Pergamum Museum, and Pergamum was called the seat of Satan by Christ in the first chapter of Revelations, first or second chapter of Revelations. And Berlin decided to bring it all to them, which is why I say I really think that this is one of the beasts, and that this is key, and that in between this 888 AD to 1888 AD is the actual millennium, and that we are now into chapters 20 and 21. And you know what happens in chapters 20 and 21? Do you know what happens in here? Let me tell you if this sounds familiar. Like, here it is. So this is interesting. So it says, Satan will be let loose from his cell and will launch again into his old work of deceiving nations, searching out victims in every nook and cranny of the earth, even Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog is Russia and Syria. Yeah, Russia had their kings slit throat. Communism hit them. 80 million people died. Yeah, Satan went after Russia. Satan went after Syria. You have seen what's happened to Syria. And they're Christians, everyone. He searched out every corner to kill these people. So that happened. Then it says Satan will talk them into going into war and will gather a huge army, million strong. Anybody heard of the UN Open Borders Compact? And they brag about the last 10 years, 258 million people being removed from their homeland. And we're seeing that in Laudato Si coming true around us, with all these cities being attacked and socialism being pushed on an international level. And ultimately, when you actually read this diversity and inclusion thing, the one thing that it excludes, above all, is independent Christians, seekers. You can be a Catholic because that's pagan. They've got many deities, and you have to pay, and they worship exactly the way Babylon worshipped its people. Read Baruch, the prophet of Baruch. Israel listens to him. It's time for you to listen to him. The prophet Baruch wrote exactly how Babylon worshipped, and boom, Catholicism does exactly that. No, it's being an independent, a seeker. You know, if they ask you how you are or whatever, and they say they find out you can lose your job. It's that kind of a thing, right? So first of all, they'll stream around the earth, surround and lay siege to the camp of God's holy people. In my opinion, that's Washington, D.C., the new capital of Israel. I could be wrong, but there's definitely millions of hordes moving around and taking out, fighting Antifa in America. In America, the mobs are called Antifa, right? And they'll no sooner get there than fire out of heaven will burn them up. The devil who deceived them will be heard in So anyway, this is where we're at now. The devil who deceived them will be hurled into the lake of fire and brimstone, join the beast and fall process, the three in torment around the clock for ages without end. And then I'll get into this later. But my point is that the last 240 years, or 200 years in my opinion, are actually just in these little, 7 and 9. That's it, in these two verses. It's easy to actually miss it. It's easy to actually skip it. And so many people are taking the easy way out. And so many pastors are doing this. So many churches are teaching this. And they say, oh, all these things are happening. We need to look for the Antichrist. Oh, all these things are happening. We need to look for, there's the church age. We need to look for the tribulation. The tribulation is coming. Oh, Trump is the Antichrist. And they have all these different things. The church age is over here, right here. The Great Commission, there is no, that's such great. Jesus said, it'll go to all nations. He didn't say, you need to go do that. He said, you need to spend time with me, and then I will give you what to do. And be like the wind. The Great Commission is the absolute opposite of being like the wind, right? So then it has all these things about the kingdom, 1,000 years, is totally separate from the church age. I mean, it's so messed up because people haven't read all of Revelations, and they really, really don't. We are not really educated on Islam. I mean, we really aren't taught a lot about Islam or what they did. I mean, the curriculums that our students get, 622 to 750 AD, that's right in there at the end when it said, the very end, it said the saints would be hurt at the end. This sort of thing is the kind of thing that's hidden in the media. So people don't think of this could be the Great Tribulation, when so clearly it is. So clearly that was really bad. They killed off 270 million people. We aren't facing anything like that today. We are, but in smaller numbers. And it's sad because, I mean, anyway, so Germany is really... Anyway, I'm running out. I think I've done everything here, right? Haven't we done everything? And I kind of laughed at the beginning of this because I was like, they're going to wonder why I have Kylie Jenner with Prince Albert, you know, with the Renaissance and the Gutenberg Bible. They're probably like, what is she doing? How is she going to connect it all? But I hope that made sense. I hope it was somewhat of a line. I just wanted to explain, since I spent so much time doing it, how I got from here, you know, Prince Albert is the Antichrist, to no, you know, and Beirut is Babylon falling, all these things about Babylon falling. And I get all the way to, oh, no, we are in chapters 20 and 21, 1,000 years later. I thought that maybe I should tell you how I got there. And so I hope this helped you. I have 2 more videos that I really want to film for you. But in the meantime, I hope this helped you out. Look at this, 12th of March, 21st, I swear. Anyway, I hope this helped you out. I hope you guys are doing well. Tomorrow, we just have a few hours till the new year in Jerusalem. And I love you so much. I have really enjoyed. Thank you for giving me $1 a month. That has made all of this possible. All of this research possible, even through COVID. I owe so much to you. And I now understand how much I owe to the Father. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But so much of this I can see throughout my feed. I'm like, wow, I'm really lucky I found this stuff. So many blogs were wiped off. So many blogs were killed. And I was able to find this stuff every way. None of the pastors are teaching it. Not a single pastor. The closest I could find is Chuck Missler in 2017 finally made an order of events that, boom, had Final Rebellion, Satan released Gog and Magog number 2 after the millennium, which was so nice to see. I was like, he finally said this happens after the millennium, but I don't know if he ever said we were out of any of this, you know, that we were past it. So, unfortunately, most preachers teach that we're like right here, and that the whole book of Revelations is still to come, as if Christ would come and say, I got to deliver this to you now, so you're ready, and just be like, oh no, he wasn't warning us about getting beheaded. He wasn't warning us about being burned at the stake. He wasn't warning us that all of our numbers would be right now. You know, Christians, you have to realize Christians dominated this area. Christianity was the number 1 religion in the Middle East. Christianity was the number 1 religion in Africa. Islam wiped out all of that. But the ironic part of that is that Islam also wiped out Babylon. You know, it came with its desserts. It also came through and wiped out Babylon and destroyed it completely. And people don't really pay attention to that. And they should. He said Babylon will fall, and guess what? Islam did. But because our curriculum is so controlled by Islam, they pay so many billions into it, we don't really hear about it. And then we don't know that, hey, a lot of these things have already come to pass, though we probably should have figured it out with, you know, the bubonic plague. That's kind of a thing. But then again, they name it something else. They name it the Justinian plague, which is just ridiculous. And I mean, they call it a great extinction event. I know I just had that photo here, but they call it this like epidemic to end all epidemics. But then they don't teach it to us in school. We know it was super bad, but we are not actually taught it in school, and so we don't really line that up with we're taught about the plague, but go ahead and watch any plague documentary. I have watched all these documentaries on the plague, and let me tell you, like these plague documentaries are like 1660 and 1686 and 1540 or 18 this, and I'm like, when is it? When did it start? I know it has big pustules. When did it start? Man, it took me forever to find out that it started all the way back in 541 AD. You will not find a bubonic plague video that will tell you it started all the way back then, even though it was the epidemic of epidemics. The picture I cannot find. I bet you guys are all staring at it, going, it's right there. There's the epidemic of epidemics. Don't you see it? There it is. Thank you for yelling at me. So, this was so bad. This changed the course of civilization, took down the Roman Empire, took down the Byzantine Empire, but we don't learn about it. They tell us it's the Justinian. So there's so many reasons I can understand why people think nothing's come yet. But oh my gosh, the people of the early, ADs, they suffered, and they suffered greatly. And the reward of that was having things like the Renaissance and freedom in Christ. Freedom. They printed the Bible first. That tells you they were definitely reigning with Christ. It was the Crusades in this period that beat back Islam. That gives you 7 ways of lying. 7 that preaches and teaches 7 ways of lying and to beat your wife. I mean, that was beaten back by the Crusades and the Christians. And that all happened in this time of 888 to 1888. Humanity did incredible things. All of the nations, all across the continents, grew and prospered in this area in new ways. And when this era ended, then the world wars began. Satan went back to his old tricks, and the world wars began. So, love you so much. That's my second ending, but I'm gonna be too exhausted. I still have work to do tonight. All right. I love you guys so much. Mwah. Thank you for staying with me for so long. I'm sure this is a long video again, but I'm so glad to have you with me. I'm so glad that you stayed with me for my entire year's journey of research over the last year, over deciding where we are in Revelations. Today, March 14th, 2021, the last day of the lunar month of the 12th month of the year 7000. Come a long way. Go ahead and donate $1 below if you can, if you want to support this. I know $1 is a large amount for so many people across the world. 25 cents, 50 cents. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. It really does. And I truly am grateful. We have enough followers, such a small percentage actually donate. But that's why it makes a big difference, though. There's so many of us that when you donate 25 cents, it does make a difference. And it makes our relationship much more equal. And I would love that if you could do that for me. Just donate down below in the link down below. And make sure to subscribe if you want to catch the next that are coming. Because I'm not on a schedule. I just can't with my FND, with my spinal issues. All right, then. I'll see you guys later. Or also watch these videos. Because these are the 2 things on this that I just covered before. And I've got some other fun playlists you should check out. All right. Love you guys. Mwah. Bye.